what do you notice couples who divorce or go through this, and I use the word lightly here, like gracefully, like what are the things that they do?
I love that you use the word grace because I think it's an acknowledgement that just because we didn't work, it doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. We can still respect each other and have a form of love. And I feel that society and the audiences that are around us like to hear the drama of a separation because their lives are boring and then it becomes salacial. But it's trying to numb the noise in the background and just say, okay, you and I talk about why it didn't work, and I can still respect you and love you and be your friend or exit gracefully with you, acknowledging that you're not a bad person, I'm not a bad person, but maybe we just don't work anymore.
Welcome to the Millennial Money Canada podcast, a podcast to elevate your financial planning literacy so that you can live well, build wealth, give generously, and leave a legacy that you're proud of. I'm Guillaume Girard, financial planner, and in this episode, I had Chantal Cattermole as a guest. She is a family lawyer in Vancouver, BC, and Chantal represents families through life-changing events and sensitive disputes. She understands the visceral nature of family conflicts and manages to simplify these complex issues into sensible solutions while building relationships or keeping them intact. Whether it's structuring spousal support, dividing assets, drafting marriage agreements, or planning multi-generational wealth transfers, Chantal thrives in guiding her clients through these complex processes to protect their families and their future. She's seeking cost-effective resolutions outside the courtroom whenever it's possible. She's experienced in multi-generational estates planning to protect and preserve family wealth, knowing this requires long-term vision and communication. She's a certified arbitrator, collaborative professional, family mediator, and parenting coordinator. She's earned her Bachelor of Arts from the University of British Columbia and her LLB from Queen's University. And she's also a fluent French speaker, but we didn't speak French today. Let's go to the episode. Hi, Chantal. Welcome to the Millennial Money Canada podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Should we do this episode in French?
We could if you want.
We might lose a few listeners. Can you share your story on how it led you to helping families navigate life-changing events and sensitive disputes today?
Like how I got into this area of law?
Yeah, what's your story behind, what led you to this field?
Yeah, so funny. When I went to law school, I wanted to be a securities lawyer. So I wanted to be an M&A lawyer that practiced business and corporate law. And I actually won the securities award in my law school. And I started practicing in that area right away. And I really liked it. And then my dad passed away really suddenly. And he was young. He was only 52 and he passed away. And I was articling in Calgary. I'm born and raised in Vancouver and in North Vancouver. But at the time I was articling in Calgary, and after my dad passed away, I came back to Vancouver, and I left the practice of law, and I dealt with some family issues. And one of the summers that I was in law school, I worked for a litigation boutique firm that did like a bunch of different things helping people. And I always thought I wanted to do corporate law. And so that had been my focus. But after my dad died, I took some time, 1 year, to deal with stuff associated with that. And then I decided, no, I really want to be a lawyer again. But I went back to work with some lawyers that I knew that practiced in litigation. And then one of their focuses of their practice was family law. And I was like, my gosh, I don't want to do that. I hate divorce. I don't want to help people. That just is terrible. All I want to do is corporate law. But the lawyers that I worked with, they had this family practice, and I thought, well, I have to do what they're telling me to do, and I'm just the baby lawyer. So I started doing it, and then clients liked me. So then my practice just started growing, and then it just grew and grew and became bigger and bigger. And I'll never forget, maybe 15 years ago, I was at my mom's best friend's house, and I was saying, and she was saying, I'm so proud of you. You've done so much. You've come so far. And she's like, but I always knew you would be a family lawyer. And I said, well, why? And she said, because you love people and you love helping people, and you have such a great EQ. And so for me, family law wasn't my choice. But what I always tell people is, where you're supposed to be professionally, it always finds you. And for me, the best part of family law is I get to do all that corporate money, fun, like stuff that I find interesting, but I get to fill my bucket every day emotionally because people come to me when they're going through a difficult time, and I get to emotionally support them and help them through their process. And that makes me feel really good. So I get intellectual stimulation and heart stimulation. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Can you talk about your role specifically? Like, how you are helping your clients? What kind of clientele reaches out to you? If you have to describe, your avatar, so to speak, can you just talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So for me, I actually have 4 roles, but I'm a mediator and an arbitrator, but we'll leave those to the side. But as a lawyer, I practice in 2 different ways. So I practice on the front end, mainly as a solicitor. So helping people protect their assets, protect their businesses, protect their wealth in what would be colloquially called like a prenup. And then I help people on the back end when they've entered into a separation. So it can be on both sides, when you're still happy and when things aren't so good.
I want to go back to the the comment you made about the analytical side and the emotional side. What's what would be the most challenging part, do you think, of your job when you're helping clients navigate, those situations that are both emotionally charged, but also financially important?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for me, what I always tell clients is if you come to me to be your lawyer, your helper, your advocate, I may not tell you what you want to hear, but I'm always going to tell you what you need to hear. And so for me, the way I help people navigate through it is with, honesty and integrity and kindness, but really trying to understand like holistically the whole picture, right? So if you're talking about it on the front end and somebody's parents want to give them money, but the parents are really trying to control what the kid is doing with the money or how to protect that asset. It's having the conversation like, well, why do you want that control? Or what is the basis of that? Because we can talk about the tax and the finances and how to structure all of it, but it's really important to understand like underneath the iceberg, right? Like what's that larger emotional piece? And then on the divorce side, it's just a lot of coaching around like, you may financially have this insecurity because you think I'm not going to have enough money, or how am I going to live if I only have this or that, or how am I going to make these payments or be able to survive? But the reality is it's a learning process and coaching. So working a lot with financial advisors to explain like, this is your new budget and this is your new reality. So I think it's about educating people on the law, educating them on what they're entitled to, but then making them understand emotionally, psychologically, they're going to be okay, and understanding what their fears, right?
Yeah, it's very similar to, what we do in a way, right? When you talk about financial planning, yes, it's all about numbers, but ultimately it's getting really deep into their values, their goals, what's important to them, and then connecting the dots, even if sometimes they don't really see it. And that's why I find it sometimes really hard to, in a way, like sell what we do, because what we do is peace of mind, bringing in confidence in the future. But people really don't think, they feel that way, but they don't necessarily think that way, right? But that's kind of the end emotional state that they want to get into, right? How has your approach changed over time from when you started to now?
I think when I started, I would take on the stress or anxiety or the urgency that the client would feel that the problem had as my own, and exercise more in a state of panic, to be like, oh, this is a problem. You have to do it right now, or we have to solve it immediately. Whereas sometimes you just have to take a breath and be calm and get the facts and analyze things, holistically, and see what the full picture is. Sometimes taking a break or a pause or taking a little bit more time to look at the situation can yield better results than just going so fast. So I think not taking the problems on personally is different for me now, and realizing that I can help them by shepherding them with navigating their expectations in a way that is a bit more relaxed.
Is there something particular that you've been coached or you've implemented to be able to separate the two together instead of taking it on, or it just came naturally to you, as you progress in your career?
think I'm still terrible at it,
Okay.
trying really hard. I think over time, it's just recognizing that you can be there and be supportive for your clients while still having respect for yourself and your boundaries, right? And giving the tools that they need to succeed and taking away some of your own personal arrogance to say, it's not me who has to solve all their problems. It's not me who has the power to do all that. But sometimes in a role like you or I, where we're advising, we can become arrogant in the sense that we feel I can do everything for this person, or I can make everything better. And sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just have to identify that they need to do their own work, or they need the help of another type of an expert, or maybe they just need some time to sit. And rather than always trying to push to get them to a solution or to get them to a place of resolve, sometimes you just have to sit back and listen and observe and see what they need. And the solution can be found within that. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, 100%. That's a good segue into, the lifestyle of the transitions, I think that people will go through. And I believe that's one area where people will hire you within your services. I'm assuming sometimes it may be that when the divorce happens or when they're going through it. I would like to take a step back, if it's okay with you, and start, given that our listeners are anywhere from early 30s to mid 40s. I wonder if I could have a chat with you around what are the things like business owners could do or could think about before having kids while they're starting dating, or, while they're getting married and they're young. And then as they progress in their career, once they have kids, once they acquire assets, and then ultimately when the divorce occurs, maybe what is the process there? What are the things that they would need to think through, or that would have to be mediated? So maybe touching on this a little bit. And then at the end, depending on how much time is left, walking through, let's say they want to pass to the next generations and want like a few things to think through there. But I'd like to be a bit, on the proactive side, essentially. When someone is, let's say, starting a business, let's take this scenario, they're 30 years old, they're a business owner, they started a marketing agency, they're newly married, and then the spouse is working at corporate jobs. What would be the key considerations there to proactively plan and minimize the impact of an eventual divorce or separation?
Okay, let's take a step back in your story, though, and make them that they're just dating first.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Because in British Columbia, if you have been in a marriage-like relationship or more, so you don't even have to be married, you just have to be in a marriage-like relationship for 2 years or more, then your assets are divisible 50-50. So everything is divided 50-50. Okay? So marriage-like relationship in British Columbia in particular can be something that we can fall into that we don't even realize that we're doing. So if we're dating and we're having sleepovers at each other's houses, and we have our toothbrush there, or we have a drawer there, or, we go to each other's gym, we hang out with our friends, but, we share a car, or like we always drive together, that can be considered a marriage-like relationship. Maybe we get our mail delivered there because it's just easier because we were both out and about and we signed up for, something, and then we both get our mail delivered there. We can trigger into a marriage-like relationship quite easily now in British Columbia after we've just been kind of seriously dating for 2 years or more. Think about how expensive it is to rent. Maybe you're just starting out your business. You don't own your own house. You've started dating somebody and you guys decide like, man, I'm paying $2,500 a month. You're paying $2,500 a month. Let's move in together and save that other bit of money. As soon as the 2-year mark triggers, you're dividing all of your property 50%. So it doesn't matter in your story if we're newly married and started a business, or we've just been living together and starting a business, the exposure is the same. So then if you're newly starting a business and you are dating or in a marriage-like relationship or married, you may want to consider a couple of things. At the very basic, maybe you want to consider the way that you structure your business, which is outside the scope of probably this podcast a bit, as it relates to liability of your spouse. Do you want to incorporate? Do you want a partnership? Do you want to be a sole proprietorship? What sort of aspects do you need to take to protect assets? So if your business doesn't do well, you can protect that property. That's a bit of a different side of the story. But if you're just starting a business and you're in a marriage-like relationship or married, you might want to say to yourself, well, I put all my life savings into that business, right? I put $250,000 or $100,000 or $50,000 that I had before I started dating, before I was in that marriage-like relationship. I put all of my savings into that business. And maybe I want, if we break up, to get that seed capital back. So the law says, like we just talked about, that 50% after 2 years or more after you're married is divisible 50-50. But then within that, there's exceptions for what's called excluded property. Excluded property can be assets that you had prior to the relationship, or they can be assets that come from excluded sources that you received during the relationship. Prior to, I saved a bunch of money. I had, some stocks. I had a TFSA or an RSP. I house, those assets would be protected. Those were all worth $1 million, $100,000. That nugget would be protected if I can prove that I had it before. And then I would just share the growth. So if my assets at the start of our relationship were worth $100,000, and at the time that we broke up or separated, they were worth $300,000, I would get the first 100, and then we would divide the 200 equally. That is how assets are divided in a very basic nature. Usually, if people want to structure it so that that original nugget is protected, they want to paper trace it, they want to write it down, they'll do a prenup. But people will also do a prenup or a marriage agreement if they want to protect the growth. So if in your example, when we're talking about a company or just starting a business, and you're just newly been with somebody for 2 years, or you're just married, and you think, well, if the business goes amazing, if I take it public or I grow it or something like that happens, maybe I don't want to share the growth of my business equally with my new partner. Then you'll enter into a marriage agreement, a prenup, that says, no, I'm going to keep all of the seed money and all the growth of my business, and I'm not going to give any to you. Now, we need to make sure that if you're saying that one person isn't down here and the other person is way up here. So what we do is we try to factor in some type of compensation payment to level the playing field a little bit, some type of a payment to allow so that one person can't say, well, it's so unfair, I gave up everything, I lost everything, because then the law will set aside the prenup agreement. So sometimes, if I've got a business and it's going to go crazy and I've put all my life savings into it, you'll want to protect it. Other ways that people want to protect assets is if their parents said, I'm going to help you with a down payment, but their parents want that money back. They say, like, if you break up, we don't want your partner to get half of the money that we are giving you. It's an advance on your inheritance. It's a gift that we're giving you. Grandma always wanted you to have a house or whatever it is. So we'll often structure agreements to say that no matter where that money goes, no matter how it changes form from the first condo to the last house, that you can always trace through that property, that money, so that if you separate, you always get that money back. So there's different ways that you can structure that piece. Now, things get more complicated the longer that you're in a relationship, the more the court or the law will want to make sure that if the relationship ends, everybody is equal. And it gets more complicated when you have children, because they want to make sure that both households are the same. My household can't have ramen noodles, only in your household have filet mignon. We both have to be eating chicken breast. So sometimes when we're drafting these agreements to protect assets, we have to make sure that we're crystal ball gazing into the future to say, well, what happens after you've been dating for 2 years and then you get married? Do you want to have children? What does that look like? Are you always going to work? Is it important to you that one person stay home? So I always tell people when they're starting out a relationship, I call them the come to Jesus talk. It's really good to talk to your partner about money. What do you want to do with money? What is your expectation about children? What is your expectation about work? Are we both going to work? Is it important that one of us stay home with the children? How do we see or envision what our life is going to look like in the future? And that's difficult, right? That's a hard thing to do. But it's just about planning so that everybody feels that they've been heard, and then the resentment doesn't build within the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's a lot of things I want to touch on here, but one thing is, how do you find the different generations, how do they approach that topic, which I would call, plan for the worst, hope for the best? Like, this is not really a topic that maybe people want to approach necessarily. Like, oh, what if we divorce? Because you don't really think like that. I would say, you would think you'd be together forever. So how do people approach this topic about, drafting up a prenups agreements and just having those difficult conversations, or come to Jesus moment, like you call them?
Yeah, I find like the older generation, our parents' generations or the boomer generation, less desirous to talk about it than the younger generation. I feel like the younger generation, in my opinion, almost feels more open to talking about it. And I think if you are open about it, it removes that yucky feeling, I guess, that uncomfortable feeling, that feeling of why are we setting up the demise of our relationship when it's just started? Why are we talking about the end when we're just in at the beginning? But the reality is we're not talking about the end per se. What we're talking about is, how do we want to grow our assets? How do we want to establish our life together? Is it important to you, Guillaume, that we grow together as a unit financially, or have you been a hustler your whole life working really hard and you don't want to share? Or maybe you want to share certain things, but you need to have some economic autonomy, right? Some economic autonomy or choice. Or maybe it's just not even your fault. It's your parents, and your parents have just said, like, we're giving you this money, but there's a condition associated with that.
Okay, so this would all be drafted in the prenup agreement. You would stipulate, the assets that were acquired before, or you may want to stipulate even the growth that will be part of it. You would want to stipulate that. What are the mistakes that you see people making at this stage of life when they're drafting up prenups agreements?
Okay, so a prenup, like any contract, is divided into three main parts. Okay. The first part is called recitals. In a contract, a recital is a letter. The recitals are probably the most important part of a prenup, and it's the story. The most or the second most. It's the story. Guillaume is this age. He was born here. He did this. This is where he worked. Chantal is this age. She was born here. This is what she did. They're dating. They moved in together. They hope to get married. They want to have kids. This is where she works. This is how much she makes. This is where she's anticipating. It sets out the story. Most bad agreements don't pay attention to the story. Then you have the main part with all the legalese that, is the numbered paragraphs, and it says what happens if this happens or that happens. That's important, but largely based on precedent. The nuances and the finesse of the agreement comes around the compensation payment. So what happens? How do assets get divided if we separate? That is where you really want like the good legal advice. And the second most critical piece is disclosure, which is the schedule attached at the end. If you don't disclose and say, Guillaume has a car and a TFSA and an RSP and a bank account, and Chantal has a mortgage and a this and a that, all clearly laid out with account numbers and details, then the agreement is not worth anything. And pursuant to Section 89 of the Family Law Act, a family law agreement can be set aside for two main reasons. My first reason is what I call clerical reasons, okay? Which is like the contract was just drafted poorly. They didn't do disclosure. They didn't have that schedule. They didn't tell the story well. It can be set aside by the court. The court will just read it and say, well, that's garbage. It's not drafted well. The second is what I call the subjective pieces of how it can be set aside. And that is, it's unfair. Guillaume gets everything, Chantal gets nothing. It's just significantly unfair. It's the legal word that we use. So the court just looks at it and says, well, that's not fair. Or there's duress, coercion, power imbalance. So somebody didn't get ILA, independent legal advice. Somebody didn't see a lawyer. It was the eve of the wedding or hours before or weeks before the wedding. And there's all this pressure where you have to sign it or I'm not going to get married to you. That's duress. I have to do it or something bad will happen. And then coercion, right? Bullying. If you don't do this, then that, or I'm demanding that you do that, all of those things. So you really need to make sure when you're entering into the contract, into the agreement, that you've spoken about it, that you've had the talk that I said, and that the agreement is drafted properly, and that the other person gets independent legal advice. So if you're the one that's desirous of protecting the asset, or your parents say, look, we're going to give you money towards a down payment, but we need you to enter into the agreement, and you're asking the other person to do that for you because you're going to derive a benefit from it, then you're going to pay for their legal advice. You're going to get them a lawyer and you're going to pay for their legal advice.
Okay. There's a lot to to get right there in order for it to be enforced down the road, right? So let's say fast forward, 10 years where the assets have grown, whether it's within, the business, in the equity in the business, whether it's the RSPs, the TFSAs, non-reg accounts, everything else of the business. Maybe they bought like a rental property together. Maybe they have a cottage now. They have 2 kids. How do you revisit those agreements? What you stipulated at first? So what happens then? What's your advice there?
Yeah. So 2 things. Sometimes agreements will just say, we will review it if we have children, or we will review it at different points in time, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. If the agreement has the stipulated review period in it, then you need to mark in your calendar that when an event happens, we review it. Because if you don't review it, then the other person could and then you separate. The other person could say, well, you could have reviewed it, but you chose not to. So that's your fault. So tough, see you later. To me, that puts a lot of pressure on the relationship, that there's kind of this like big weight on our back that we always have to review things again, right? You were always wondering, oh, shoot, it's been 4 years and 6 months. We need to start reviewing it, or we're about to have our baby. We need to review it. So usually what I do, or what I suggest people to do, is have the agreement written today, how life is today, but then factor in, if we have children, then the payment will be this. If we've been together 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 15 years, 15 years plus, this is how much the compensation payment will be. If we get married, if we have kids, it's this. If we don't have kids, it's that. And then you've covered off the different life circumstances that can happen over time, to say, then you can really just leave the agreement in the drawer and not have to worry about it. And then the agreement will say, well, if we took the money that was the excluded property at the time, your parents gave us $500,000 to buy our house, but then we sold that, we made like $4 million. And then we took part of that and we bought a bigger house, but then we also bought the cottage. It won't really matter, because the agreement will say you'll always get that 500, even if it goes here and there and everywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Talking about the business side of things, that can be pretty complex, but most of our clients are incorporated or soon to be incorporated. What are the strategies here that you would usually recommend to a business owner that, let's say, would want to protect their assets? Like, what would be a structure that would be ideal in the event of an eventual divorce, in order for them to perhaps keep, the company, or, not having to give half, basically?
Beyond the marriage agreement,
Yeah,
I think that they would want to ask themselves if they want their spouse to be a shareholder or not. If their spouse is a shareholder, are they a non-voting shareholder? Is their spouse a director or an officer? Probably they may not want them to be. And then if they're passively involved, right? Like if it's a joint venture, that's a different thing. But if they have no involvement in the business at all, and it's just for tax purposes, then that's fine. Make your spouse a passive shareholder with no voting rights. And then make sure that you have a shareholders agreement that specifically dovetail. If you don't have a marriage agreement, then at the very minimum, have a shareholders agreement that speaks to what happens to the shares of the passive partner if there's a separation, right? So the shares would get valued. The owner operator gets to buy out the other, the spouse's shares at fair market value. What's the determination of the fair market value? Is there an EBITDA calculation in there, or is there a mechanism for evaluation? And all of those terms can be put and should be put in the shareholders agreement.
okay.
Yeah. So at the very minimum, have a proper shareholders agreement, and then think about who you're going to give power to, or if you're going to give power to them.
Makes sense. Okay. That makes sense. Now let's fast forward to a few years later, and unfortunately, after 20 years of marriage, this couple decides to part ways. So what is, and I would assume, would you agree that this is the most common time and point where people reach out to you, or would you say that they reach out to you usually like at any point throughout throughout the transition, the life transitions that we've covered today?
Yeah, interesting question. So I will speak colloquially and a little bit tongue in cheek, but if you marry or enter into a marriage-like relationship that lasts a long time, right? 15 years plus, 12, 15 years plus, and then you separate. Most of the time that separation comes, this is my personal opinion, it's not fact, it's not statistical. This is just my observations of doing this for almost 20 years. Most of the time, those long-term relationships, when they break up because they've just grown apart. They've lost each other. They've become busy in their own independent professional life, or they have, been focused so much on the children that they didn't pay enough attention to their own relationship. And those ones are actually sad because you can see they had only not lost each other, and now the loss of each other in that breakup, it can manifest in lots of salacial drama, right? You cheat, she cheats, somebody has an affair with their coworker, with their assistant, with something, or maybe somebody is very sad that the relationship has ended, so they turn to substances to find comfort, right? There's lots of drama that can be associated with those longer relationship breakups. But if you root down into the crux of why those guys break up, it's usually because they've grown apart because of other factors in life. The other people, so there's a chunk of my practice, divorce practice, that's those people, right? The other ones, tongue in cheek, maybe a bit more, those are the people that were just the bad pickers. They just chose poorly. I met you at the bar. I met you on holiday. I didn't realize that you're kind of crazy, or there's something wrong with you, or really we're not alike. Like, there are people who are very clearly in a shorter or mid-length relationship who accidentally procreated. We accidentally had a child together, or we just got together for the wrong reasons that we didn't really know each other, or one of us is a little or totally crazy. And those ones tend to be the shorter term relationships and can be more volatile, but lots of drama there.
Interesting. To come back at the longer term relationships, so my parents separated. They were not married, but they separated after 25 years. And you touch on a lot of things. I don't know all the intricacies of, the exit, but the separation, but they did focus on the kids and they did grow apart, right?
Yeah.
After 25 years. So yeah, you can see that. That's a very interesting contrast, I would say, what you just described in your practice, versus shorter term and longer term. I guess it keeps things engaging, to say the least.
Yeah. I always say that nothing can possibly surprise me now. There's absolutely nothing that I've not seen or heard or been exposed to.
Wow. Okay. So let's dive into deeper, like throughout the division of assets, the process of the divorce itself. So once they get there, then they retain your services. And then what is the process looking like? Are you working with both spouses together? Do they have, you're representing one, they also have a family lawyer for the other spouse? Like what is the process there? And what are the steps?
Yeah. So let's break that down into what are the categories of items that have to be considered at the time of divorce or separation. And then what are the different types of processes that can take place once a couple is separated. So when you've separated, it's not mandatory that you have a lawyer. You can sit at the kitchen table, have a conversation, write it on a napkin and say, you keep this, I'll keep that, you do this, you do that, and go your separate ways. You don't need to have a separation agreement to get a divorce. You don't need to have a legal separation agreement. There's no such thing as that. You could literally write it on a napkin and just go your separate ways. And then if you're married, you can use that napkin to file for a divorce, where you just use that to file an affidavit together. We go there and we just say we both want to separate and we want to file the paperwork. One of you can have a lawyer and one of you doesn't need to have a lawyer. That's not recommended. Both of you cannot have lawyers and get the help of a mediator or get the help of an arbitrator to kind of help you grind out or negotiate a deal. But generally speaking, what happens is both parties retain a lawyer, have the discussion with the lawyer's support to work through and end up with a separation agreement. Those volatile people, that section of society that separates because of an affair, or substance use, or, psychological issues, sometimes those things end in court. But more and more our family law legislation is trying to push so that people don't end up in court and settle outside of court. And I think about it for myself as a control freak. Why would I ever want to go to court and have a judge who doesn't know me, doesn't know my partner, doesn't know what our hopes and dreams and goals were, doesn't know what we wanted for our kids, deciding how my life is going to be divided? That just sounds terrible. So once you get a process in place, which is generally that both of you get lawyers, then you work on how to figure out what's going to happen in the 4 buckets. So I'll just really quickly talk about the 4 buckets that exist in separation. So bucket number 1 is division of property. So you'll remember a few minutes ago, we talked about the presumptive division as 50-50, right? Then we have to sort out what goes in the bucket. What are the ingredients of the pie? Here, I'll switch analogies. We need to figure out what the pie is so we know how to cut the pie in, right? So what is the pie made up of? The pie is made up of bank accounts, assets, and debts. So it's about collecting the documents to determine what is the value of the assets and debts as at the date of separation, right? What's the house worth? What's in the RSP? What's in the TFSA? How much is on our mortgage? What credit card? What line of credit? Once we know what the pie is made up of, we can divide the pie any way we want. You can keep all the cars. I'll keep the house. We can liquidate everything. The court would tell you to liquidate everything. We can say, you keep the business, I keep the house, and then you're also going to pay me $100,000. It doesn't matter. But we need to value the pie so then we know how we're going to cut the pie. Okay? That's the 1 bucket. And that bucket can be complicated with excluded property. That can be complicated by taking into account taxable assets versus non-taxable assets. The primary residence is non-taxable. The cottage is taxable. You keep the cottage, I keep the house. How do we work on the taxes? We have to factor in all of those things.
Nice.
Then that's bucket 1, division of assets and debts. Presumptively 50-50. It can be reapportioned through different purposes, and we can horse trade assets in different ways after we know what the value is. We have to find the value, then we can horse trade them. Okay?
And the assets that would be excluded would have been stipulated in the prenup agreement, because that would have to be taken into account. Is that correct?
Yes. And if you don't have a prenup agreement, you don't have to have one. If you don't have one, then you have to prove I had that asset at the beginning of the relationship, or it was a gift or an inheritance or an insurance proceed or something else that is made up of an exclusion that I had or received during the relationship.
So you can get it back. And then there's...
So you can back up. The next bucket is spousal support. Spousal support, most complicated area of family law, very, very challenging, lots of ways to get into it, but we'll just go really quickly. There's 3 types of spousal support. 1, contractual. We entered into a contract that stipulates if we separate, I'm going to pay this much of spousal support. The next is non-compensatory, needs-based support. You make X, I make Y, and I need spousal support because it's unfair if you don't give me any. I'm going to eat ramen. You're going to eat filet mignon. You need to give me some spousal support so that we can be equalized. That's needs-based, non-compensatory. And then the third category is compensatory support. I need to be compensated for something that I gave up during the relationship. I followed you around the country for your career. I turned down the promotion so I could stay home with the kids. I'm down to part-time. I took care of you. I did the majority of the cleaning, those types of things. Okay. Then within that, and you can have compensatory and non-compensatory. Most people do. Most of the time, we don't say, I'm only getting spousal support for needs-based. I'm not getting it for compensatory. We just kind of globally call it that. But when we're arguing if there's entitlement, we use the needs-based or the compensatory as a reason that you should be entitled to support. Then we go to duration. Well, how long do you get support for? So if the relationship is 10 years, the maximum amount you get it is for 10 years. The minimum amount you get it is for 5. So the minimum is half of the length. The maximum is the full length. That gets complicated if you have kids. If you have kids and you've only been together 10 years, You can pay for more than 10 years. If your kids are young, you may pay until they're 18. You may pay until they're old, more than 10 years. It can be more if the rule of 65 applies, which means if your age plus the duration of your relationship adds up to 65 or more, then you're paying spousal support indefinitely, which means until you retire, you're going to pay. And then on retirement, it gets reviewed. And it gets reviewed to ensure that you in retirement won't have so much more than me. And if you will, then you need to pay me support. Then it gets broken down into low, mid, and high range support. And that amount and the range within there is determined based on your income. Income is probably the most complicated. We'll touch on it super, super quickly, just to say, a T4 employee, you just go to line 1500 on your tax, go over, it spits out a number. That support is going to be figured on. If you're not a T4 employee and you are a business owner, then it will go to what you draw, but it will also go to what are your write-offs and what are your available. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You'll oftentimes use an evaluator who will do an income determination for you. Then we go to the next bucket. The next bucket, so we have division of assets, spousal support. Then we have parenting time or children. Sorry. Within the bucket for children, there's guardianship and there's parenting time. De facto, if you're together at the time that you separate, you will be joint guardians. Whether you're married or just dating, you will be joint guardians. Guardianship is like where they go to school, what's their religion, do they get glasses, do they get braces, what does all of that look like? Okay. Parenting time is schedule, who do we, who has them when, and that is all determined on what is the best interest of the child. Complicated itself, very factually specific, just deal with it at the time. The fourth bucket is child support. Child support is federally legislated pursuant to the federal child support guidelines. It is determined on income, and the amount goes by how many children you have. So, for example, if you are a T4 employee, you will go to the federal child support table. You will scroll down. I make $150,000. You will scroll over to I have 3 children, and it will spit out how much you pay for child support. If you're sharing the children equally, child support will be paid on an offset, which means I'll pay you $1,000. You'll pay me $1,200. The net amount will be $200 is what you will pay. That's the offset. And then lastly, child support. In addition to child support is Section 7 or special and extraordinary expenses. Hockey, soccer, taekwondo, private school, counseling, glasses, braces. We pay that. And we pay those monies based on our percentage difference of our income. So if our incomes are pretty close, we're going to share it 50-50. If not, we pay it proportionate to our income. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a master class of the 4 buckets explanation. That was very impressive. So just to recap, so division of property, spousal support.
Presumptively 50-50. Division of property, presumptively 50-50.
Right. Spousal support, what was the third one?
Like kids.
Kids.
Parenting time, guardianship, yeah.
Guardianship, and then child support, the last one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Going back to the 50-50, I'm not sure if you saw in the US, and I don't want to get political here, but Donald Trump says a lot of things. And one of them, he came out and he wanted to revamp the divorce law in order to, I'm not sure, have you read about this? Or no?
No, tell me.
So it was a month ago, and basically his claim was that men are treated unfairly when there's a like a divorce, essentially, like, because they have to separate 50-50. So he came and he proposed something, but he tweets a lot and he talks a lot about things. It hasn't changed yet, but he wanted to revamp this so that men were not like abused, so to speak, through like a separation, or disadvantage would be a better word. I was just curious to see if like you came across that or read anything about that.
I mean, listen, friend, I find that profoundly hilarious because it's like, why do it have to be men? Why can't women be the primary? What he is trying to say is the person who is the income earner or the person who is the asset maker should presumptively get more because they're the ones that are hustling to make the money. He has to genderize it by attaching man to it versus woman, which I find profoundly offensive. But like, I understand what he's saying. And in certain respects, I don't believe this, but like even in Canada or the US or anywhere, you can appreciate if you don't have to believe the story or the logic, but where that story comes from is based on that traditional marriage example where the husband, we'll just use his example, is out working and the wife is staying home. And the husband is the one that's putting all the money in the bank and he's doing all that. And she's just the one spending the money. I have had traditional clients like that before. But I'll tell you, our laws used to be that way. So our laws used to be presumptively that it wasn't 50-50, that the person that earned it got it all. And then the person that didn't earn it had to make an argument. It's called a constructive trust argument that said, I contributed to that. So the laws came about. The big Supreme Court of Canada case was a Saskatchewan farmer's case. So what happened in that case was the farmer working in the fields and the wife is staying home, cooking, cleaning, taking. And the laws used to say that the farmer got to keep everything because he was the one that was going into the field. He was the one that was working. So he got to keep everything. But the wife and her lawyer took it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada and used the constructive trust argument that said, I have been contributing. Like if it wasn't for me, you would have no food on the table. The clothes wouldn't be washed. The house wouldn't be clean. The kids wouldn't be taken care of. I go to the grocery store. I do all of these things for you. And on that Supreme Court of Canada case, the law changed to say, if you're married, then everything gets to be divided 50-50. But up until 2013, when the new Family Law Act came out in BC, which March 18, 2013, if you were just in a marriage-like relationship and you weren't married, you still had to make that constructive trust argument. You didn't get things divided 50-50. You had to say, if you weren't married and you were just common law, you had to say, but I helped, I contributed, therefore I should get. March 18th, 2013, when the new Family Law Act came out, the legislation said it doesn't matter if you're married or you're in a marriage-like relationship, you should get treated the same way and everything should be divided 50-50 equally. But that wasn't always the case. So it used to be that you had to prove, I contributed. This is how I helped you for your successes. This is how I helped you achieve this success. This is how I helped contribute to the wealth of our family.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then like this, all the unpaid labor, I can remember right now, there's a really good documentary. My fiance, we watched it together. I'm not sure if you know what I'm referring to, but there's a really good documentary where, yeah, it's a woman who basically was trying to track all the unpaid labor she was doing. And then she made this like really crazy documentary about that, like women in society, like how much they do that is not being recognized on top of like according to corporate career and whatnot. And it was fascinating to shine lights on this, but it's basically tied to your point as well, is maybe they don't have like monetary compensation. They still contribute to the success of the household in different ways, which should be compensated or taken into consideration, right?
The law now says it is. I always call it, again, I struggle to genderize it, although as a woman, I certainly feel that, but I struggle to genderize it. But the sense of it is that there's always a family administrator, like whether you have children or you don't have children, there's always, or you can, family. I call it a family administrator. There's always that person that's remembering, oh, it's Mother's Day coming up. Oh, it's so-and-so's birthday. Oh, we have to register for this. Oh, we don't want to forget about that. Oh, tax season is coming up. There's always that administrator that is doing those unpaid silent tasks that keep the general hum of the family unit working, right? And without that person doing all those things, the unit doesn't work. Now, most of the time, it is women who do that. Most of the time, it is us who are balancing our careers and our children and all the family administrative roles. And I don't think we're compensated or rewarded for, And I think that is a lot that we have to burden. But I think the law now, as it stands, has recognized that in the sense that it is de facto 50-50, in the sense that we do have compensatory support, because in many of my files that I see, one person will push for the career where the other person will take the back seat, And so you do need to think about what are the deprivations or the losses that person suffered in order for the unit to run well. And I think Donald Trump is not taking that into.
Yeah, my fiance, she shared that a lot about that, like that mental labor, essentially, that, she's like involuntary, like kind of taking it on, like you said, like remembering the birth dates and all the little things. And this is something that we've worked on our relationship, where I'm trying to take the lead on a lot of things in order to alleviate the things that she has to think about. So we're more of a teamwork. But in our weekly meetings, like that's one of the biggest change we've made, I would say, after our 12, 13-year relationship. So I can totally echo what you said, because back in the day, it was just defaulted on the women to just take the lead on this, right? Which, yeah, and she has to grow her own business and her own career as well, right? So,
To the come to Jesus from before, right? Just to like loop the circle back, that goes back to it. Because why do relationships break down? It's resentment, right? A lot of it is just like the uncommunicated resentment. The quiet things that really bothered me that I never told you about. Really bothered me that you never emptied the dishwasher for 25 years. Never did it. But if you have that front-loaded conversation that talks about expectations and the management of expectations and the development of the familial system administration, even if they're kind of uncomfortable when you're still in the lovey-dovey phase, when everything's great, but you can say, my expectation is that we both emptied the dishwasher. My expectation is we both financially contribute. My expectation is, that I'll do the laundry, but you do this. You take out the garbage. I do that. If you have those conversations, I think it breeds less resentment, which then leads the relationship to likely being not going to suffer the detriment that it can in the later years after you turn around. Maybe when the kids are gone, or you have enough money and you go, God, I really hate the fact that you never did this. It just really bothered me. So I think it's so great that you guys are having those conversations at the outset happen.
One of the last questions I have for you is, when you talked about like the 4 buckets and the whole process, what do you notice couples who divorce or go through this, and I use the word lightly here, like gracefully, like what are the things that they do compared to others that maybe go through this process with,
Disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that you use the word grace, because I think it's an acknowledgement that just because we didn't work, it doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. We can still respect each other and have a form of love. And I feel that society and the audiences that are around us like to hear the drama of a separation, because their lives are boring and then it becomes salacial. But it's trying to numb the noise in the background and just say, okay, you and I talk about why it didn't work. And I can still respect you and love you and be your friend, or exit gracefully with you, acknowledging that you're not a bad person. I'm not a bad person, but maybe we just don't work anymore. And I don't know if society has evolved enough to accept that marriages don't have to be for a lifetime, or separation can occur. And it doesn't mean that there's a villain. There doesn't have to be a villain. It doesn't have to be bad and dramatic. Maybe it's just that we've grown apart. Maybe it's just that we've changed. Maybe it's just that we've self-identified what we want and our future is different. Maybe we actually were greater and elevated. And does it need to be tragic? Maybe it is a bit tragic and sad and not good, but maybe we can say, if we're super elevated, the ones that I see that is beautiful is like just a recognition. So glad I had kids with you. You're really an amazing parent. I'm so glad that we went through that together, and you're always going to be my friend or my pal, but I just don't know if I want you to be my life partner. That's hard and not easy, but there are people that do it. And when they do, it's beautiful. And there are people called divorce coaches or counselors, or, people that support couples during separation. And I tell all my clients, get those people. Number one, they're a fraction of the price of a lawyer. So like, why pay a lawyer to be your counselor when you can pay a counselor? And number two, they really force you to step back and look at each other and see the good in the relationship. Because it doesn't have to be all bad for it to not have worked. And you can still see the good in each other if you're not going to be together,
That's so well said. Chantal, I just want to thank you so much for your time this morning and the conversation. I thought it was wonderful. I thought you shared some really insightful piece of advice. I mean, you gave a master class on the technicalities of, going to a divorce, the 4 buckets and whatnot. So thank you so much for that. And sharing also the emotional side of your work and how you're approaching it and how you're coaching people through those difficult situations, where can people find you?
What firm do you work at?
Yeah,
Or
no, in terms of like, just is there's, the website, work, yeah,
now I'm sounding a little bit older than you, which is not good.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So just my name on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn page there. And then my firm is Cozen O'Connor. And you can access me there, email or phone, or just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. It's good. I'm not on the other, I am on the other social medias, but it's private. I don't really access that very much. But yeah, for sure on my firm website or LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'll put the link in the show notes for www.cozen.com. So yeah, thank you so much for the time this morning, and looking forward to reconnecting in the future.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
As usual, you can find us on mwadvisors.ca to book an intro meeting, subscribe to our newsletter, or just get in touch if you have any questions. Feel free to follow us on social media. All the links will be in the show notes. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.